Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Jim.
John.
Hi, couple old men on Zoom.
It sounds great. A couple old men, that could be the new name of a new podcast. Couple old men on Zoom.
Listeners, before we hit the record button, it was all about ailments. All about ailments, but we're fine now. We're on the air.
How are you?
I'm good. This is season 4. It's episode 21, chapter 21 of The Miser's Dream. We are, the end is in sight. It's up there over the hill. Season 4, almost done. And we have today, I might have mentioned this in a past podcast. Occasionally I listen to our former Senator Al Franken's podcast, and he introduces each one by saying, today we've got a great one for a change. And yes, every time. But today we do have a great one. We have a returning guest, a guy who we had so much fun with and whose star has risen so much since we first talked to him. The one, the only Harrison Greenbaum.
That is right. His book, You Are All Terrible, has been published now, and we get a chance to chat about that. But he's amazing. He really is amazing. Super fun interview.
Yeah.
Funny to talk to. Funny. When we weren't interviewing him, he was still funny. He did Cirque du Soleil's Mad Apple show in Vegas, which a friend of the show, Nick DeFott, also has done.
He's filled that comedy slot. Yep. And it's
exactly.
A weird situation. I think they jack you up on an elevator and you step out onto the stage and you have to do 20 minutes of comedy and then you're gone.
Then
it's
you
a
go
weird
back
situation.
down underneath the stage via elevator.
Mm-hmm.
Harrison's feud with Criss Angel. Hysterical.
And there's a new chapter in that one that he talks about.
Exactly. We're going to get some info on that. And he got married since last we talked to him. So we kind of felt it was time to get Harrison back on the Zoom and just check in with him.
It's been such an interesting couple of years since we last talked to you. I felt it was time to get you back to talk about some of the changes in your life. And also, last time we focused pretty much on your presentation, You Are All Terrible, where you talked about, I think 95% of all magic acts are cover acts. You suggested everybody quit. And at that point, it was a presentation on its way to becoming a book. So we'll get into that, but we didn't really touch on your origin story, how you got into magic, because you're a big deal in magic as a young man.
Yeah, when I was younger, I was bit by a radioactive magician, and with great power comes great responsibility. No, I was a kid magician. I was like 5 years old. I think I got a Hanukkah magic set. My dad did a trick for me, and he wouldn't tell me how it worked, and that obsessed me, and I became obsessed with it. And I think that really just set me on my journey. My parents were always very supportive. I think they thought I would grow out of it.
You still might.
Here I am doing comedy and magic full time as a profession.
Well, it could still turn on you. You could be a CPA. 2 years from now, we'll talk to you and you have your own CPA business.
Yeah, I'm not betting on that. I'm not betting on that at all. I think you have found your calling, or your calling found you. In any case, we're just so happy to have you back on the podcast.
I'm delighted to be back.
Okay, so I did a lot of research on you before we got on here, because I went on Wikipedia and there's like a whole page of stuff, which is a lot of research for me. And I'm sure half
one
of
page. One page is a lot of research
for me. Yes. I'm a guy who writes books about a magician, and I only do one magic trick. I mean, come on.
I can't wait for the next Eli Marks book to take place in World War II, and the year is 1975.
Research is for suckers,
Absolutely. I don't do any. So John at least read the one page on Wikipedia. I came unprepared completely, although as I mentioned, it's Tuesday, so I showered.
So we got that going for us. All right. So there are things I just didn't know about you. I didn't know you went to Harvard.
I did, yeah. And now I do dick jokes for a living, so I win.
I'm sure there's a class at Harvard that prepares you for that kind of material.
You know what's funny? There is a class called Wit and Humor, which is an English class, and I took it. And I was very proud because the professor at the end of the semester essentially allows you either write one more paper or do an example of humor for credit. And I had been doing stand-up at the time. So I was like, I'll just do stand-up for the class. And he took me to the side at one point and he said, that's the first time somebody's taken the make your own humor option and actually been funny.
Hey,
Wow.
congratulations. High praise indeed.
So what was your major at Harvard besides doing stand-up evenings and weekends?
I was a psychology major. So I studied, my thesis was on race-based humor and its effect on prejudice. So I actually used stand-up in my thesis. And I won a book collecting prize. They have an undergraduate book collecting prize because I owned a lot of magic books. So I was like, that's a collection. And so I won, I think it was like $1,000.
Wow.
More magic books. It was great.
Just because you had a collection of magic books. So, for example, if I'd gone to Harvard, okay, we're going to have to stretch this a little bit. If I brought in my complete collection of Famous Monsters of Film and Magazine, I could have won $1,000.
I think so. I think the main qualifications were A, you had books, and B, you were willing to take the time to write a paper about it that was not for credit. And I was one of the few people who was like, I'll bang something out. And so I won the undergraduate book collecting prize at Harvard. That's maybe one of the nerdiest things you could possibly do.
Well, it's $1,000 one way or the other.
So while you're in college, are you also just running off and doing stand-up gigs, or are you doing open mics, or what's going on with the magic career and the comedy career while you're at Harvard?
Yeah, so I was president of the Harvard Magic Society, which is extra impressive when you consider we had like 3 members, and I was the only one who knew magic. So I kept that going. And I also was the president of the Harvard College Stand-Up Comic Society, which I co-founded. It was Harvard College Sucks was the acronym. There was a lot of comedy on campus, but not a lot of, there was no stand-up comedy on campus. So there was sort of a hole in the market, so to speak. And I interned for Mad Magazine when I was a freshman. Everyone else was going on these like really impressive internships, like for the Supreme Court or something. I was like, oh shit, I need to do something. So I applied to Mad Magazine and I got to be one of the usual gang of idiots for a summer. And then once that program ended, I was a freelance writer for them. So that was a pretty cool sort of comedy boot camp for me, like just going into New York City every day with the editors over my shoulder, telling me what's working and what's not working.
Wow. For Mad Magazine.
Yeah. The first day I was there, they said, we're going to drug test you. And if it comes back negative, you're fired.
John, is the Mad Magazine thing in the Wikipedia?
It is. It is absolutely. And I was going to, it's a bit of a throwaway little mention there. And I have to say, for someone who went to Harvard and the fact that you went, oh, I don't need the Harvard Lampoon, I'm going to go right to the top and go to Mad Magazine. That shows chutzpah.
I think it set a little bit of tension because I tried to join the Lampoon, but the fact that I was already writing for Mad, I think, was maybe a strike against me in a weird way. But the joke about Harvard College Stand-Up Comic Society was by senior year, the poster said, like the Lampoon, but funny and inclusive. Because anybody who wanted to join the stand-up club could join the stand-up club. There was no comp procedure. If you wanted to be a stand-up and you wanted to work on comedy with us, come join. We're an open club. And that was very important to me.
So what is your standout memory from your time at Mad Magazine?
Well, the office is everything you hoped it would be. I mean, it's zany and crazy. The editor, John Ficara, anytime you needed to call like an all hands on deck meeting, he had a collection of noisemakers in his desk. And so you just pick one out. So you might hear a train whistle, or you might hear a lifeguard whistle. You might hear just cymbal. You never knew what sound you were going to hear coming out of that office, but that meant, okay, everybody gather. And those meetings were amazing because it's everybody, pitching ideas and coming up with jokes. I once came into the office and I think it was John had tape all over his face, just scotch tape all over his face for no reason, just because it was silly and funny. So they really kept that spirit alive. People would come into my office and start dancing just randomly. Like, it was just a really fun place to be. And one of the cool things is William Gaines, who is the sort of, the main figure behind the origin story of Mad Magazine, famously went to the Supreme Court to protect parody. He loved magic. And so when they found out that I did magic, every Monday meeting became a Magic Monday meeting. And even when I would visit the offices after I'd already graduated and I was working as a stand-up comic in New York, I would visit the offices whenever I could. And I usually visited on a Monday. And even if it wasn't a Monday, they would make it Magic Monday and I would do magic for the office. So I kept the magic tradition going in Mad Magazine.
Now, was Mad Magazine a must-read when you were a kid? Because it was for me. Jim, I don't know if it was for you. I'm a little older than Jim.
A little older, but not much. Yeah, absolutely. Mad Magazine, National Lampoon, all that stuff played into making me the reprobate that I am.
How about you, Harrison? Was that on the reading list?
Yeah, well, you know what it was? The way I discovered Mad Magazine was I would visit my grandma and grandpa in Brooklyn, and my dad's old room, there was a cardboard box shoved in a closet, and we'd be playing there, and I saw these magazines, and they were Mad magazines, and they let me read them. And some of them were jokes there was no way I could have possibly understood because they were about television shows that had been off the air for 30 years. These are my dad's magazines from when he was a kid. But I just loved everything about it, and the style and the humor and the way it treated authority, the satirical bend. So I always had that kind of running around. And then I think my dad and I bonded over it. I would get mad. We go, you go to the grocery store and it'd be an option, or you go to like a newsstand. And anytime I got him mad, I would carefully do the fold in where I didn't actually fold the pages. So I didn't want to ruin the back page and put creases in it. So I do the like sort of rounded Z. So I always loved Mad.
How much time did you spend looking at the fold in, trying to figure it out before you folded to see if you could guess what he was going to come up with there?
I would spend a little time. I mean, one of the cool things about working in the office is that I helped to write one of the fold-ins. So we would sit around and I helped come up with the question and the answer. And then Al never folds them. That's what's so crazy is Al would do it on these hard cardboard sheets, and he would use string so he knew where the folds were going to happen. And so he never got to fold them until it was published. So it was all done sort of crazy images and then the middle image, all by hand. It was incredible. Wow.
That really
More
is
truckers
nuts.
illustrations. I got to see them, outside of most of the magazine was in black and white until it shifted to color a little bit later on. But Mort would do his stuff with just blue ballpoint pen, just like a Bic pen. And so you can see the original art, and it's just a guy with ballpoint pen. And then by the time it got sort of whatever that process was, I guess photostated and put into the magazine in black and white, it looked like fine art. But it was just an amazingly talented artist using a ballpoint pen.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
What a fantastic experience.
Absolutely. That's just formative, I would
100%.
think.
And I still keep in touch with the editors as much as I can. They're all really, really great people, and just, the funniest people on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah, among them. Yeah. Absolutely.
Is there just because I'm a movie buff, is there a favorite movie parody that they did that still sticks in your mind, either while you were there or before you got there?
Yeah. Well, so in addition to having Mad magazines all over my grandparents' house, we had this big yellow book called I think it was the Big Book of Jewish Humor. It's this big old book with a yellow cover, and it was in our bathroom. And I think I read that thing cover to cover by the time I was a teenager. But in that book, it reprinted the Fiddler on the Roof Mad magazine parody, where all they did was update it to modern times, which was modern times for that issue. So I think they brought it from the shtetl to like the 60s, 70s. So one of the daughters is a hippie. They see a therapist. So they've just moved the time period of Jews from the European shtetl to America in the 60s. And I just loved that so much. It was perfect. And you could hear the songs. The songs were like perfectly, they changed just the lyrics. And so the meter was perfect and you could sort of sing them in your head. It was heaven.
But that artwork is so iconic. The styles. I mean, even something as simple as Spy versus Spy.
Yes.
The level of detail in these very spare drawings was just the right thing to get the point across.
I was in a class on the Cold War at Harvard, and we had to write a paper, like a free choice, anything about sort of the Cold War. So I picked Spy versus Spy, and it was great because I was able to interview people who knew the artist, because I'd interned for Mad, so I could literally email the editors and say, "What did you think of the guy?" Or I had direct first person sources. So that was such a fun paper to write. I think I was one of the few people that could email the people I was talking about in the paper and just get quotes. So it was great.
Wow, it's like doing a paper on British spies and going, I got to write to Kim Philby here. Just clarify one point.
Is James Bond around?
Could we get a shoe phone, please, and just make a quick call? I think, looking back on it, one of my favorite films, and John, I know it's on your list too, Heaven Can Wait. and they did a parody of it. If my memory serves, it was "Heaving Can Wait." And because I liked Heaven Can Wait so much, that's the one that sticks out. Or they did a parody of Jaws because I like the movie Jaws. They did a parody of that I really liked. Jawed, I think, was the name of it. So they're brilliant stuff. Brilliant stuff.
So, Harrison, what were some other comedy influences on you as you were growing up? I realize this is a podcast about magic, but it's also about comedy. And Jim and I are huge fans of comedians and comedy. So what were the other influences that really grabbed you as you were in your pre-teen and post-teen years?
So it was super old and Jewy, mostly because it was my grandparents and parents who were showing me the movies. So I got really into 2,000-Year-Old Man, thanks to my grandmother. So Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner, we wore out the cassette tape.
About 4 days ago, a plane landed at Idlewild Airport. The plane came from the Middle East, bearing a man who claims to be 2,000 years old. Sir, is it true that you are 2,000 years old?
Oh, boy. Yes.
You are it's hard to believe, sir, because in the history of man, nobody's ever lived more than 167 years, as the man from Peru would claim to be. But you claim to be 2,000.
Yes, I'm not yet. I'll be 2000 October 16th.
Sir, could you give us the secret of your longevity?
Well, the major thing is that I never, ever touch fried food. I don't eat it, I wouldn't look at it, and I don't touch it. And they never run for a bus, there'll always be another. Even if you're late from work, I never run for a bus. I never ran. I just strolled jaunty, jolly, walking to the bus stop,
Yeah, well, there were no buses in the time
No,
of
in my time, I mean,
What was the means of transportation then?
mostly fear.
So that was a big deal to me. It's a mad world, the double VHS. I'd watch it with my grandmother. We had to switch tapes halfway through. And then my dad loved Mel Brooks, Blazing Saddles, and the whole everything Mel Brooks did, the producers. So that was all very much sort of just in our just in the air we breathed as a family, like this Jewish humor. So Mad Magazine, Mel Brooks, all that kind of zany stuff running around. Stand-up was not something that I really realized I could see until I was in college, because I was interning at the Mystery Lounge, which is a weekly magic show in Harvard Square on the 3rd floor of a Chinese restaurant. And so every Tuesday I would walk. It was like a 2-minute walk from my dorm because it was in Harvard Square. I would sneak off and I would bring people's boxes up, and I essentially apprenticed. But on the other days, it was a comedy club called the Comedy Studio. But I was like, wait, there's stand-up on the other nights? I had started doing stand-up and fooling around with comedy my freshman year of college. That's what led to the MAD internship. And all of a sudden I could hang out at this comedy club and see live stand-up. So my first stand-up experiences really live were in Boston at the Comedy Studio, which what a stroke of luck, because it was some of the smartest, weirdest, sort of independent alty comedy. So it was a really good way to get introduced to the scene. A lot of people thought I was a Boston comic when I moved to New York, because I spent 4 years in Boston doing comedy, and all my friends were Boston comics. So I think a lot of people thought I was a Boston comic. And I was like, no, I was born and raised in New York.
So who stuck out for you? Who do you see early on there that made an impact?
You had people like, these are people that I'm still working with. Like I remember Mike Kaplan. He was a bunch of years ahead, and I was like, this guy's really funny. This guy Dan Bolger he's still super funny. I say he still is super funny. There were so many of these Boston guys. And then the classic Boston guys, DJ Hazard, Tony V, all those guys that have been there for years and years and years. It was just, it was heady times. Everybody was trying to be smart and clever. And it was the opposite of pandering, because it was a comedy club in the middle of Harvard Square. There's a lot of like MIT students and professors and smart people. Gary Gulman, I mean, I've loved him since I've seen him in Last Comic Standing. That guy is incredible. And so, you see these guys in a 70-seat club on the 3rd floor of a Chinese restaurant. It was incredible.
Kevin Meaney was in that. Wasn't he a Boston comic? Stephen Wright, wasn't he a Boston comic?
Yeah, those guys were a little bit. They kind of were in LA or New York by the time I was in Boston. But yeah, I mean, I worked with Kevin in New York a bunch. Kevin Meaney, he's amazing.
Yeah, God rest his soul. I don't know live if I ever laughed harder than at a Kevin Meaney show here in Minneapolis. He was the kind of running bit was I've fallen and I can't get up.
Yeah,
And it
big
was,
pants, people.
yes, it was. I was on the floor through most of it, and Chris Whiting, one of my buddies, was sitting in the front row, and at one point Kevin turned to him and said, "How you doing?" Chris said, "Fine." He said, "You enjoy the show?" "Yeah, very much." "What do you do?" Chris said, "I'm an actor," which was just dead on the wrong response.
Yeah.
He just owned him. Anything he tried that didn't work, then he would just, well, maybe it's time for Chris the actor to come up and do a monologue. It was absolutely one of the, I still think about it, and God rest his soul. He was a genius.
So, Harrison, if you look at your career as kind of a two-lane highway,
Sure.
and you've got magic and you've got comedy, which car went out ahead first? Was magic out first and then you added comedy?
Well, I'll say that's a good analogy because there's been a lot of crashes and accidents. And a dead deer. I don't know why that, but that has to do with my career. But
Because they have no peripheral vision. I mean, they just have none.
you know, it's one of those weird things, which is anytime I'm doing a lot of comedy, the magic, I'm like, man, I can't wait to get back to magic. And anytime I'm doing magic, I'm like, man, I can't wait to get back to, stand up. It's weird. I think that's one of the things that I'm always wrestling with is figuring out which lane I'm in, or maybe it's just one big lane. Definitely when I was in college, I've been doing magic. A frat brother called me up from API. He said, "Hey, I'm doing this. There's a once a year comedy show. Do you want to do magic on it?" I said, "Can I do stand up on it?" And I did stand up on the show. And that was my first taste of doing comedy. And I loved it. And I remember that freshman year, I was working for Mad Magazine and I was barking for stage time. So I was handing out flyers on a corner for 2 hours. And that was in exchange for 5 minutes at the end of the show where I could do, my stand up. And as I was getting ready to go on stage, I was putting sponge balls in my back pocket. And a comic came up to me and he goes, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, this is just in case I need like a big closer. Like if the jokes don't work, I had this magic trick. They're going to love it." And he's like, "You'll never learn stand up if you have a safety net." And that was a really formative piece of advice and moment. And so for a very long time, I kept them very separate. There was like a divider between the two lanes, to use your analogy, because I wanted to, have comics recognize me as a fellow comic, if I was going to get past at the Comedy Cellar, for example, which is every comic's dream when they move to New York, I wanted to get past as a comedian, like on my own laurels as a comedian, not with the magic. And so I kept them very separate. And most comedians didn't even know I did magic for years and years. It was like a preschool teacher in their burlesque career, right? Like just putting pasties in a duffel bag and hoping none of her colleagues finds out. And so over time, though, and I would do like hosting a Monday Night Magic or something. So I was doing magic. I do a bar mitzvah to make money when I needed to, because like I still had those chops. So I had these dual identities. And then eventually I realized I'd been making fun of magic, even though I love magic. And I was like, man, I wish people created magic the way they created stand-up, which I realized is the way they create art, right? The idea first, then the technique, and the whole thing. It's all in the book. And
It is. We talked about that last time.
yeah. So I had to put my money where my mouth was, though, and come up with this show that sort of really was magic, but with a stand-up comedy ethos. And that's where What Just Happened came out of. And so I've now been a little bit more, it's perfect it's 2024. So I'm more, people are gender fluid. I'm art fluid. I'm both magician and comedian.
Before you sort of separated them out or got into stand-up, was your magic, did it have a lot of comedy in it? Or was it really kind of straight?
Well, as straight as I can make it. But Mike, it was always funny. I was always trying to get laughs while doing magic. I think that was something I realized when I did stand up the first time, was I was like, oh, this is what I've been driving at. Like, I love making people laugh. That's such a fun, visceral experience. So I was always like the funny magic guy, but the magic tricks were the instrument for the laughter. Then once I started really doing stand up and realizing how a joke works and writing comedy and like the real art of comedy, then when I started putting it back together, it was all about like, even if I removed the tricks from my magic show, you would still hopefully walk away and go, wow, I saw a really great comedy show. So it's this idea that it's this great stand-up comedy show with magic as opposed to a magic show with comedy. So that's sort of the reversal that I've been trying to attempt.
That's interesting because, it's usually the other way around, right? And so it's
Almost
nice.
exclusively the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah, almost exclusively. I'm racking through my little file in my brain now, trying to think. But that's a really interesting way to think about it, and I've never thought about it that way before. So one more thing for me to ponder.
Yeah, it's a hard route because for me, I want the rhythm of the show to be a stand-up comedy rhythm, which is like I talk about laughs per minute as a gauge. The average comedy magician is probably one laugh every 2 or 3 minutes, and like one big laugh. Whereas a comedian is a big laugh every like 10 to 20 seconds, maybe 20 to 30 seconds. So I want that laugh per minute for my show. But that means having a lot more jokes. It's a lot more energy. It's a lot harder task. But I think that's what gives you that feeling of, oh my God, I'm laughing so much it hurts. I'm crying. I pissed myself. I love when people pee themselves. That's the best.
A couple years ago, we had Carissa Hendricks on, aka Lucy Darling, and we just repeated this segment earlier this season where she talked about this theory she has, maybe theory is the wrong word, about how, comedy and magic, both, you either make them laugh or you surprise them.
Sort of, they have the same structure, right? There's a setup which creates tension, and then a punchline which creates release, and then tags which squeeze out a little bit of extra laughter. And that's the same format with the joke. There's the premise. You're going to pick a card, the card's lost. There's the punchline, so to speak, which is that revelation. Wow, he found the card, even though that's impossible. And then the additional tags, which are like those additional moments of astonishment, like, oh my God, and the deck is blank and it's a different color. So structurally, they're very much the same. And the fuel for both is surprise. They're both about surprise. A joke is just a verbal magic trick. They're built on the same bones. For me, it's all about, I start with idea first. So the idea is just what is going to tell the story. There's sort of an overarching story, but yeah, it's fun to keep pushing. Like I want to build up the laughs. I want you laughing. Those laughs are based on surprise, and then here's this magic trick that's built on the story behind that joke.
But it seems to me that your goal in having this mix of comedy and magic, to the degree that you do, magic can be so procedural and comedy can't be procedural, yet you found a way to keep the laughs coming at a comedian pace while also doing magic. And that in itself is a magic trick.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said the word procedure, because that is one of the more challenging parts of a magic trick to make funny, is that you do have to sort of explain the rules of the game each time. And so that's always a big challenge. And any trick that I bring to stage is, how short can I make the procedure? And the parts of the procedure that I must do, is there a way to make them funny? Is there a way to add a joke every 20 seconds while I'm explaining the procedure, or while I'm having them pick a card, or while I'm having them do whatever it is? Something that just comes from time. So like, even I have the FU card trick. I don't know if we're allowed to curse on this thing.
You'll get beeped, but you can go ahead. We had Rachel Wax on a few weeks ago, and we had to cut a whole segment out and put it out as a separate adults-only section because there was just no way to edit what she was saying, but it was a good segment.
So the FU card trick, let's call it.
Okay.
I've been doing that trick in my show for a very long time, but then when I got the Cirque du Soleil show, Matt Apple, the show that I got to headline in Vegas for almost 2 years, I did that trick. I did that trick every night. I did it 650 times. And every so often, you constantly find a new line or a new thing that you can do during the procedure. And so that thing becomes like chock full of jokes. So it's just like joke. Handing the book is a joke. What he does when he receives the book is a joke. What he does when he reaches in is a joke. And so some of that stuff comes from just doing it over and over and over again and going, oh, that's how you make that part funny. That's how you make that part funny. So when I'm working on material, sometimes it's about just adding those laugh lines until it's, fully saturated, so to speak. So that FU trick is a good example of that procedure now of getting them to just name a card and hold on to this object. There's so many jokes now at every point because I did it 650 times in a row in Las Vegas and had nothing to do but add fun jokes to that.
Well, you're jumping ahead on us here, but I wanted to talk about, that's one of the reasons I wanted you back, was how did you get into that experience and what was that experience like? Because that's a wholly different thing than, that number of shows in that amount of time. It's probably not what, I know you did a lot of stand-up gigs, and a lot of open mics and a lot of running around when you were younger, but to have that sort of a regular schedule of shows was probably not something you were used to. Am I wrong?
Yeah, having to drive to work was new because it was in Las Vegas. I actually had to drive every day, which I listened to a lot of podcasts. So there you go. Yeah, I tried to keep it interesting for myself. The audience has changed. Vegas is not as much about the 4 seasons as it is about each convention is its own season. So it's like rodeo season for 10 days. And so the entire audience has cowboy hats. And then it's CES, which is the electronics convention, at the same time as the AVN, the Adult Video Awards. They come at the same time. So that's a whole little mini season. There is the holiday season, obviously. The summer is very, very hot. So they're a different group than that comes in, the winter, so to speak. So you can keep things a little bit interesting and different. But yeah, the idea of doing 10 shows a week in sort of the same exact show, I had to work really, really hard to make sure I was constantly kind of trying new things, adding new things. So I wasn't becoming like a robot or a machine, which was very important to me just as like an artist. I didn't want to get stuck doing the same jokes every single night.
That in itself, I think, is a gift. Jim and I have talked a lot about the number of times we've seen Mac King in Vegas and the way that he is able to make every show seem like this is happening for the first time when in your heart he's dealt with just about anything that's going to come up. Yet
Right.
there's that freshness, and you got to experience that same sort of thing. Is there something you took away from that, a lesson you took away that you'd want to impart to other people who might be getting in that sort of situation?
The key for me was, I was doing shows on my off days at comedy clubs. I was very lucky. The Comedy Cellar has a club at the Rio in Las Vegas. So I would hang out there a lot and get to hang out with other comedians. So they don't want to lose the sort of like New York comedy edge. Hanging out a lot, doing a lot of extra shows. There are a lot of midnight shows in Vegas. So I would do 2 shows at Cirque, jump in my car, and then run and do that. So that was really helpful, was just doing extra shows that kept that variety alive. So it wasn't the sameness. And just being really diligent about switching things up. It's very easy to be like, okay, this set works. It works 95% of the time in this room and it crushes. And so it's very hard to give that up. And I had to be like, no, let's take that. We know those jokes work. Let's take them out for a second and put new things in and get those working. And just being really strict with yourself about that.
That in itself right there is a level of discipline that I would think even at the highest echelon of our business, that's a rare quality, that kind of discipline. Once you've got something that works, now let me just rephrase that. Once I find something that works, I am loath to change it. It's very difficult to let go of something I know, okay, this ABC is going to work every single time, and I'm going to get a laugh, 2 laughs, 3 laughs, 4 laughs, and that's good for the audience. It's good for the show. It's good for me. To let go of that is, I don't know that I have the chutzpah or the discipline to do that. So but I can appreciate it like nobody's business. So I think it's really cool that you assign that discipline to yourself.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think Cirque is used to having an act just get plugged in and then try to do that thing exactly the same way till you die. Like it's, I shouldn't say bad. It's a circus thing until you leave the show, not die. Safety is very important.
Whichever comes first.
Well, you don't want the trapeze artist saying, "I'm just going to switch it up tonight, but forgot to tell my partner that I was going to do it differently."
Exactly. The circus arts, definitely consistency is key. But when I came in, the whole idea was they wanted to, instead of doing a clown, essentially, it's a New York themed Cirque du Soleil show. So the original idea was bringing a really authentic New York performer. So they brought me in. I was like, I'll be your human bagel. So I wanted to bring, they told me that the brief was, when you're on stage, you want to feel like we're at a New York comedy club. And I was like, that's great. If you want that feeling, then there's a couple of rules, which is like, you can't censor it because New York comedy clubs aren't corporate in that way. They're not censored. And I need the freedom to switch jokes in and out and switch things in and out because comics aren't doing the same set every single night. And you want people to show up 3 days later or 3 weeks later or 3 months later and go, wow, the show is slightly different. Even if it's the same person, it's a different jokes. It was a totally different experience. So that was, that's a learning experience, I think, for them and for me of like trying to figure out how do you give that New York comedy feeling in the show. And so that's how sort of we both approached the role.
And they were okay with that.
Yeah, that's going to be my question too, is that if I was the producer of a show and you came with a killer set that moved the show forward and we got all kinds of laughs and the next act benefits from the energy you've created, and then you said, yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to do this thing over here, and it's going to take me 3, 4, 5, 6 shows to get back into, get this back up. I, as a producer, would say, can't you, in some of the, midnight shows you're doing, can't you get it fixed over there and then bring it to us full blown? I don't want to.
And I was doing that a lot.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I was working the jokes. The jokes weren't coming in like brand new. They were being worked on the other shows and then introduced once I knew they had a very high likelihood of succeeding. So I wasn't just like open micing it at a 1,200 seat theater in the middle of a circus. But so I was trying the new stuff outside and going to, these late night shows and shows on my off days. And then during our breaks, I would fly to New York for a week, do 30 shows and come back with a whole new chunk. So that was more of, it's closer to that than, I understood the needs of the producers to have a consistently good show. But part of that also meant keeping it interesting. Like, I think that helped keep it fresh. We had fans come back to see me, 50 times, 60 times, they would come see the same show over and over and over and over and over again. I think a large part of that hopefully was that part of, the show was changing up. They didn't know who I'd be interacting with. That chunk, that 30 to 40 minutes of that 85-minute show were really up in the air based on how the audience was reacting. And so every show was fresh and new.
God dang, I wish I would have seen it now. It's killing me. If you go back, make sure you send us a message, because I really would beat a path to see you do that show. So
I don't know, Jim, the number of times we've said that to people on this show, I think listeners feel it's an empty promise at this point. We're supposed to go to so many places.
Done it yet, but that doesn't mean we won't. I'm serious. There's 2 or 3 people that I would go. If you go back to that show, I'll come. I'll come to Vegas and see it.
He's not lying. Okay, I want to tie something in Vegas. I don't know if this happened while you were in Vegas, but in my mind, it ties back to your Mad Magazine background, which was the let's call it the debacle with Criss Angel and his menu. Which just tell us the brief history of what happened there and why he's such a little old lady about these things.
Oh yeah, I don't think it was a debacle on my side.
No, not at all.
No, I've been doing these like roasts every year. Basically, what we call the State of the Magic Union. There was a State of the Comedy Union of this Andy Kindler, who's an unbelievably funny comedian. Yeah. Every year in Montreal, he basically roasts what happened in comedy, and so it's the State of the Comedy Union. The industry loves it, comedians love it, and there was no magic equivalent. And so I kind of thought it'd be really fun if there was someone who was roasting what happened that year in magic. And that became this sort of magic year in review. And I started doing it. I did at Magi Fest back in, I think, 2019, the session, 2020. Then the pandemic happened, so I started doing it virtually. So my 4th one, which was part of this live stream, how do I end this thing? What would be a really fun sort of big closer for this year in review? And Criss opened up a restaurant called Criss Angel's Kablip. The Kablip stands for Criss Angel's Breakfast, Lunch, and Pizza. So the full name of the restaurant is Criss Angel's Breakfast, Lunch, and Pizza. And I saw the menu. The whole thing seemed a little bit insane. It's in the middle of the desert. There's a champagne table for this diner. There's like a love table. If you look at the restaurant, the handicap spots are farther from the entrance than Criss Angel's spot, which is closer to the door. So you're just like, what is happening? So for this roast, I was like, I'm going to make fun of this restaurant. And the website for his menu and for the restaurant is kablip.com and eatblip.com. The actual official website is eatblip.com. And it's not kabliprestaurant.com, which is a fact I know because I bought kabliprestaurant.com. And I uploaded a parody of his menu, which, as you know, based on all the things that we just talked about, I have a huge history with parody as a writer for Mad Magazine. So as soon as I saw the menu, this is in my wheelhouse, right? This is what I was built to do, is parody things.
You essentially went to college to do this.
Literally, yeah. So I see his menu. I'm like, I can write a parody of this menu. This is what I do. I think I had like 24 or 48 hours to finish it because I came up with the idea and then the roast had to go live like literally in, I think, within 24 or 48 hours of coming up with the idea. So I'm literally coming out of the cellar with my laptop in a taxi doing Photoshop and like getting this thing ready to launch so that it's there for the roast. I put it out. It has, it hits the mark. And also there's a link in that menu, all over the menu. I say it during the roast. If you like what you see, donate to Criss's charity. He has this great charity for children with cancer, which I still encourage people to donate to. I tried to donate to it. He sent the money back. But I think if you donate though, he'll keep it. And it's for a good cause. I donated the money to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. So it still helps kids with cancer. But
I'm going to donate in your name.
Okay, thank you. No, honestly, he does great work. It's for kids with cancer. There's no joke there. His charity is really great. So I uploaded the thing, encouraged people to donate to his charity. Despite all of that, 4 days later, I get a cease and desist from his lawyer, and it's really aggressive, and it doesn't make any sense. I put it on social media. I'm like, he's threatening to sue me if I don't take down this menu. What's up with that? All of these lawyers come forward and are like, I will do this for free. You just point me in the right direction. And this really great lawyer, Paul from Public Citizen, which is Ralph Nader's consumer advocacy group, highly suggest you donate to them as well. They're a really great group. They defend the First Amendment on the internet, which is very important, especially when it comes to comedy and parody. So that's really cool. And has a soft spot in my heart because like William Gaines did a Supreme Court case on behalf of Mad Magazine to protect parody. So if anybody understands parody law and its importance, it was me. So the second I got that cease and desist, I was like, that is not how at least America works. So my lawyer wrote a hard response back being like, hey, I'm his attorney and, the law is not on your side. And I let him put some jokes in there. He's like, can I put jokes in? I was like, I'll help. Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Like, you should make these claims disappear. Even Houdini couldn't wriggle out of the legal restraints I think you're putting yourself in. All these like references, which is awesome. Oh, your arguments don't levitate to the realm of the plausible, something like that. So I'm paraphrasing. But yeah, I send that response and I don't hear anything back, which is a good sign for these things. Because also there's all this stuff like anti-SLAPP legislation, not to get super technical, but there is this idea that like really rich people, or people in power can essentially stifle free speech because the threat of a lawsuit is so scary that even if you think you can win it, you don't have the money or means to defend yourself. Because if this did get to federal court, it would cost me 20 or 30 grand to win. I'm pretty sure I would win, but it would cost $20,000 or $30,000 to do it. So you have to ask yourself, is it worth 3 years of your life and 30 grand? That's why there is this anti-SLAPP legislation, which is to try to prevent that kind of stuff. Thankfully, somebody like Paul is, was pro bono. So he was like, this is something that is important to me, is to make sure that people's freedom of speech is defended, especially when it comes to comedy. So I really appreciate Paul stepping up.
And what was the end result been?
The end result is that a month after that, Amazing Jonathan passed away, which was horrible. He actually died on 2/22/22, February 22nd, 2022. And Anastasia asked me to speak at his memorial, which was a huge honor. And then I got a call later saying, hey, Criss wants to be there. Is that okay? And I said, it's AJ's memorial, whatever AJ would have wanted. I'm in service of that. And then they said, well, if Criss is going to be there, he can't know you're there. If he knows you're there, he's not going to come. So can you hide? So they hid me in a closet during the memorial. And then after Criss spoke, they like gave me the signal and I came out and gave this speech where I basically roasted Criss to his face, because as Matt King said, this wasn't really a memorial. This was a dead person roast. So I roasted Criss and also everybody else who was there. And I got pied in the face during the thing. So it was definitely, I took some hits, literally. So that was our sort of in-person interaction. I got to look him in the face and say, what are you going to do? Threatening to sue me again? You should have called it Dine Freak. It was right there. That would have been a much better name. Then, so that, that kind of felt like, okay, that seems like a fitting end to this chapter. And then I get called out by Cirque du Soleil. They say, hey, can you come in for one day? Because originally the show was 2 comedians. Then when I joined, it was 3. And then I took over the whole role after those 2 guys were there for 3 months. And then I became the full-on headliner of the show. But originally I was just a fill-in for one of those guys for one day. And I came in for one day, and then they said, hey, can you stay for a few days? Then it became a week. And then they offered me, a 1.5-year contract to stay with Cirque du Soleil. I had to call my wife, now wife. She was my fiance at the time. We go, hey, what do you think about moving to Las Vegas? So really it was I think we had 4 days to figure things out, to go from New York to Las Vegas. And she was a champion. She did most of the packing and getting the dog and the cat, everything. I mean, I couldn't have done without her. But all of a sudden, within a week, I went from New York comedian to Las Vegas headliner with a billboard staring down Chris's on the same street. So that was like, okay, now that feels like a big, and I was doing Criss Angel jokes in the show. The Cirque du Soleil people came up to me after my first show. So I thought that was going to be my only show. So I laid it all in the field and I did a lot of Criss Angel jokes. So I'm like, I'm on the strip. I got to do it. And they were like, those Criss Angel jokes. I'm like, oh, do I have to take them out? And they're like, no, you keep them in. And I was like, okay, gotcha.
I found a home. Yeah.
And then I'll show you a fun surprise, which is going to work better on video than it does on audio. But I did publish You Are All Terrible.
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, that's it's my fault that we didn't get to it before this point. But
No. This is the perfect segue.
Okay.
Because for the magicians, you guys can see this on camera, but it looks exactly like the other 8 volumes of Tarbell. If you have my book, you have 9 volumes. All of your friends could wonder how they're missing one of the volumes of Tarbell. It says Terrible on the side. But the beauty of it is I'm going to give away a little surprise. It's a surprise when you read the book. So if you don't want any spoilers about the book, fast forward about a minute or two. But if you would like the spoiler, I will say it now, which is this came out from Tannins. It's the first book Tannins put out in over almost 40 years. I think their last book was in 87. So I was very proud to be part of the sort of Tannins history. But on the inside of the dust jacket is the menu.
Oh.
Full size.
Oh my God.
Looking like it probably would if it was in full color in Mad Magazine. So it's the inside of the dust jacket is the entire menu in basically life size.
That is so delicious.
And that's hidden inside every single copy of this book. So get it. Get the first edition while you can. Who knows if we can keep doing that? But yeah, we put it inside of every single book.
That's fantastic.
Well, this is nice because last time I was on the podcast, you were the author, but now we're both authors.
We are.
Although you have way more books than I do.
Well,
you don't have a single menu, though, do you, John?
I do not have a single menu.
Yeah, my book has pictures. Does your book have pictures?
No, it does. Well, one of them does. One of them's a comic book, but
does your book have an illustration with butt plugs? I think not.
You win.
Let me think.
I don't know that the word butt plug has been used on the podcast up to this point.
Yes. Can I tell you this? You're going to probably have to cut all of this out, but the illustrator for the book is this guy, Scott Baird. He's awesome. He illustrates a lot of magic books. All the illustrations in my book are fake. They're not for tricks that are in the book. The idea is if you're flipping through it, I just want you to be very confused as to what these tricks are. And so I made these fake photographs for him to then turn into illustrations with long sort of Mad Magazine-esque, that was the idea, right? Like kind of, this is what it should look like. It should look sort of real, but be insane. And one of the things is me just holding a bunch of butt plugs in my hands and having to give notes to a really good magic book illustrator about the intricacies of making it look like a butt plug. Was one of the highlights. So God bless Scott for putting up. I don't think he ever thought in his magic illustrating career he'd have to take so many notes on the reflections in a butt plug.
John, if we need to, I'm going to give you a line right now. Folks, we're going into a segment now that you might not enjoy or feel like it belongs in our podcast. If so, but plug your ears and we will see you on the other side.
Oh.
Yeah, don't knock it until you try it.
Exactly.
Wow.
Try everything twice. That's my motto.
I just made such wrong choices in my life that brought me to this point right here.
I think the correct choices.
Hey, Harrison, so what has been the magic fraternity's response to kind of parodying Tarbell, which is for magicians, almost a Bible, if not the Bible, almost the Bible. What's been the response?
Yeah, the Bible was written by a guy who famously did blackface. The thing, you know what? The original idea was just I want everybody to have one extra volume, but all the writing on the back it makes fun of Tarbell, and then the inside dust jacket also all makes fun of if you have a Tarbell, it makes fun of the text of Tarbell. I just thought it was a really funny sort of touchstone, right? It's that Mad Magazine thing of like take something that everybody knows, which in the magic community, Tarbell is obviously one of those sacred cows, and then deflate it as much as possible, which is very easy considering how strange and weird Tarbell was. I did a huge deep dive into Harlan Tarbell in order to parody him for the back cover and inside cover. And man, that guy lived a life. But he also did a lot of blackface, which is bad. So I think in the book it says...
I did not know that. So I heard the blackface joke earlier, and I thought, what is that in reference to? And now, of course, I know. So
yeah, I think it says, while the book you are currently holding now, You Are All Terrible, the book, may not be an actual volume of Tarbell's Course of Magic, it does have the distinct advantage of having not been written by a magician who spent much of his career in blackface.
Okay.
So that's in the... There's an edge.
There is an edge. This is the New York comedy circuit version of our podcast, John. I just don't think there's any way around it.
I'm thinking, all honesty here, I've not bought your book because I talked to you and I've heard your presentation on it, and I'm not a magician. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, I got to buy this book because,
Yes.
there's that famous version of Genie called Weenie
Yes.
that Mike Caveney did with Harry Anderson and those other guys, which is apparently very hard to find. You can't find it. And it might end up being the same with your book, that something that's such a sharp parody of such a specific group of people and their ilk is a valuable thing to have.
Yeah.
And also, this book, the second half in particular, is just about how to write comedy. And sort of one of the twist ending of that section is that it applies to all of art. So if you're in any kind of creative field, or you're even just trying to communicate better, all these rules of comedy are really, really helpful. So I do think the book can have a wide audience where even if you're not a magician, you might not get all of the beginning parts, which is all about a parody of magic. So the first section, but the second section on comedy is super, super useful. And I think worth the price of the whole book. Plus you get this just handsome volume, gold foil and everything.
Are you doing an audiobook version?
I have thought about it. There's not that many magic books that have an audiobook, mostly because you need to,
Right.
teaching you how to do a magic trick.
Right.
So you don't need to listen to it. And then your right pinky moves to 4 or 5, and then you take your second card. It'd probably be harder. I have thought about it. I think it's a project that I would like to do because it is in my voice. And so it'll be really fun to record the humor in my own voice. But hopefully if you see me perform and then you read the book, you can kind of hear my voice a little bit as you read it.
No, I want to just ask a couple other questions about the book, because I love the fact that there is parody in the book. I'm a big fan of Mad Magazine and parody in general. But there is a whole, I mean, it's not just parody. As you mentioned, there's a whole section here about how to write comedy. And it came from a presentation that you were making, right?
Yeah, so I did everything backwards, which makes sense actually, because the whole thesis of the first part of the book on originality is that magicians are doing it backwards. They start with technique and then come up with an idea. Like they buy a magic trick and then figure out how do I jam it in the show. And I've been saying you need to reverse that. Lectures, I didn't know anything about the magic lecture circuit until I started lecturing. I just wanted to be helpful to magicians. But usually what you do is you make your lecture notes and then you get them printed. And so when you get to that town or you get to that convention, at the end of your lecture, you sell those notes. That's where you make a lot of the money. But that didn't make any sense to me because like as a stand-up, you would have published your jokes first and then tour them. You would tour them and they get better over time and funnier and sharper, and they resonate with the audience better. And so by the end of a tour, or by the end of running that cycle of doing it and taking in the audience response, then you eventually end up with something sort of polished. So the idea of starting with lecture notes felt backwards to me. So the plan has always been do the lecture over and over and over and over and over again, tour it around the world. And then once it felt kind of sharp and polished, then convert it into the book. So the book is sort of like 8 years of traveling all over the world, plus, 30 years of performance experience.
So it's like your version of a Netflix special. You've toured it for years,
exactly.
You got it honed, and now it's time to put it on tape.
Exactly. So that's what the book is. The book is a record of the lecture after doing it for years and years and years. So it's taking all that stuff that I learned and adding stuff. And yeah, there's fun bonuses and surprises. And I want it to be fun to read. Like not every magic book is very fun to read. And I wanted mine to really feel like just a joyous experience. And if it sits on top of the big book of Jewish humor in your bathroom, I'm just as thrilled.
Fantastic. I just want to be clear that there is a lot of useful, not that parody isn't useful and fun. I just am saying there's a whole bunch of information in here that a magician, a comic, a person who has to stand up and make a presentation to their, I mean, it's not just fun, it's fun, but it's got a whole bunch of great information that anybody could benefit from, right?
Yeah, that was the secret, was finding a mix where I want you to enjoy it the whole time, but that's the parody and humor and comedy is the sort of sugar that helps the medicine go down, to be Mary Poppins-esque about it. So yeah, it's a fun read, but that's there to help you get to all the good information stuff. So yeah, I try to cram it with as much information as possible, live up to the sort of 3 C's of comedy, which contrast compression and clarity. The last 2 are compression and clarity. So keeping it tight, making sure it's clear. That's the stuff that I worked out by doing the lecture over and over again. So really trying to deliver that message effectively and clearly, and then also giving you fun jokes while you're on that journey. So that's definitely the goal.
And it's available straight across the board, anywhere you want to get it at this point.
So you can get it from Tannins directly, tannins.com. They're the publisher, and it's a great brick and mortar shop in New York. So definitely support that. It's available all over the place now. Vanishing Ink has it. A bunch of magic stores have it. So it's around. So definitely grab your copy. And I'm excited for it to get into as many hands as possible.
You're going to get it into mine.
That's fantastic. All right, Harrison, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to take us out with one of your, or any joke that you love that will work on this PG show. Just take us out with a great joke.
Ooh, my opener, which I love, is I walk out and go, I actually just got married to a girl from Nebraska, which is a fun sentence to say because different parts of it are surprising to each of you. I mean, what a journey you guys just went on, huh? You were like, married? What? A girl? No. Nebraska? Get the hell out of here. That is too many plot twists for a single sentence.
Yes, that's way too many plot twists.
But how about how funny that is? Love it. Absolutely love it.
But I was so surprised the stuff we learned that we didn't know. I didn't know we went to Harvard.
No, all of that was news to me. Mad Magazine. I mean, it all makes so much sense when he unfolds it like that, and you go, "Oh yeah, all of this leads you to exactly what you're doing and where you are right now." So I enjoyed talking to him. I enjoy him as a human, and if he ever goes back to Vegas in that Cirque du Soleil show, we're going.
Or go see him in New York. I mean, one of the as he didn't say to us, but I've heard him say elsewhere. One of the downsides of the Cirque du Soleil show is it's just 20 minutes. Now, granted, he's doing it a bunch every week and he's changing things up, but he said he is much more excited about what he's doing now, which is doing a full-length show. I think he's off Broadway right now. He's going to do a whole hour. He's going to record it and then erase that from his memory and start a brand new 1-hour special, just like comics are doing these days, which I think is admirable but terrifying.
I'm scared to death just talking about it. And to conceive an hour and then start from scratch is incredible to me. And as a semi-professional, it is so harrowing just to think about that. Intimidates me.
Yeah, do your Halloween show brand new every year.
No, I will not. The pressure alone, just saying that, I have got the cold chills. So he's something, and it's certainly an inspiration to me as I do think about what's next or what should I be doing or how should I do it, he certainly, and his book, the latter chapters in his book really lays it out pretty clearly.
It really does. It's
Now,
a very funny book.
Yeah, he's
smart.
a delight. So we
And,
were lucky.
You know, I love the way he approaches his feud with Criss Angel, in which he is, on the one hand, entirely sophomoric, the things he's doing. But on the other hand, he keeps saying, he's got a great charity. You should contribute to the charity. I'm going to send money to the charity, even though they're going to send the money back. So he's a grown-up about it.
Yep, exactly.
But he also is calling him out, which is
enjoyable for us.
It is enjoyable for us.
At the very least.
And the fact that he's been on the show twice probably means Criss Angel's probably never going to be on the show. But that, I don't really care. I don't want to talk.
I had done the math on that myself and came to that same conclusion that we have just, although stranger things have happened.
That's true. Much stranger things have happened.
If we invite Criss Angel and we don't mention Harrison Greenbaum and he doesn't do any research, maybe we got a shot at it.
Yeah, he doesn't do any sort of searching. Realize that. So I sent you a little something to listen to. It was 6 minutes long. I'm not going to play the whole thing here. I will put a link in the show notes if people want to listen to the whole thing. But let's just listen to a minute or so of it here.
Get ready to dive into the career of Harrison Greenbaum. And the stuff we found, a podcast interview, some show notes, it's wild.
It really makes you think, how does someone blend such totally different things? This is a guy who went from playing with magic sets as a kid to Harvard, then Mad Magazine, and even Cirque du Soleil. It's not exactly a straight line.
Seriously, it's like he's the poster child for things that don't belong together.
Yeah.
But that's what makes this whole deep dive so interesting. So the interview, it starts off pretty classic. Kid gets a magic set. Dad won't explain a trick. You know how it goes.
Oh, absolutely. That little spark of how they do that is practically universal. But for most kids, that's kind of where it ends. But Greenbaum, he takes it up like 10 notches. The guy goes to Harvard. And instead of physics or something, he studies psychology.
Wait, it gets even better. Not only does he study psychology, but get this, he wins a prize while he's there at Harvard for his collection of magic books. Clearly, this is more than a hobby. This guy's serious about the history of magic, the how and the why behind it all.
And that psychology background, it's not just a fun fact. Think about it, understanding how people think, how they react. That's comedy gold. Probably a big part of why Greenbaum's so good at crafting those jokes and routines that really hit the mark.
What the heck is that?
Well, here's the thing. We're going to peek behind the scenes a little bit here on our podcast. We work from an outline. So we know what we need to, we don't write down what we're going to say, but we know the order of things. And I know what episode we're on and what chapter we're reading. And all of our interviews are done in advance. And then we listen to it again right before the podcast. And we take notes, and I take notes and write down what we want to say about it and what was germane in that interview. And we've always done that from the very, very beginning. We have an outline we work from just because I like to be freewheeling, but we got to go somewhere. So
you got to have some sort of flight plan.
Yes, and I saw a little post from our friend David Williamson on Facebook, and he said to all who were reading, "This is really bizarre. I found this site. It's an artificial intelligence site called Notebook LM." He said, if you upload a PDF and give it a couple minutes, it will produce a podcast about that information. He uploaded Expert at the Card Table, and it came back to him and he posted it for us. A 15-minute podcast, a male and a female, talking about the ideas in this thing they just read, Expert at the Card Table. So I tried an experiment. I wanted to do something a little bit longer, so I uploaded one of my writing books, The Popcorn Principles, in PDF form, and it gave me a 15-minute conversation between what it sounds like two people, although they are all both AI, talking about the ideas in that book. So the thing that we just heard here, a couple minutes of, was all I gave them was my notes. Here are my notes of the things we want to talk about with Harrison Greenbaum, with no other explanation. And a couple minutes later, there was a 5-6 minute podcast that you guys just heard a bit of that sounds like two human beings talking about our interview with Harrison Greenbaum and the things that Harrison said. Now, I got some of the stuff wrong. They have trouble pronouncing Mad Magazine a couple times, and there's a couple other things that aren't quite right. But we've all heard podcasts where they had trouble pronouncing Mad Magazine or something like that, and it still went out. It's just really fascinating how.
Now, you say fascinating. Is this sort of the beginning of you telling me I'm done with this podcast, that you've
No.
got an AI host that you're going to use?
No, because as anyone who goes to the YouTube link and listens to the whole thing, there's no there really.
Well, I was completely taken in.
You were taken in by what sounded like a kind of mediocre podcast.
Yes, but what it sounded to me like somebody was sort of reviewing. I thought it was like somebody reviewing our podcast of this discussion with Harrison Greenbaum, and I thought, who would review a podcast? Is that what they have? They have a podcast where they review other podcasts?
I'm sure they do.
So I was completely taken in, did not understand it was AI. That's how gullible a kid from St. Paul can be, I guess.
Well, that's how good it's getting. And as we've talked about off mic, we can clone our voices. There are a couple podcasts that do their intros or outros with cloned voices.
I'm terrified.
If we were in the middle of recording an Eli Mark's book, and let's say we're all done with, there's 4 mistakes that need to be created, and God forbid you weren't around, I could feed the whole book into 11 labs online, clone your voice, and have them correct those sentences. I don't want to do the whole book because AI can read, it can't perform.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
And what we heard in that little snippet that I played earlier was them building in human sounding ums and ahs and overlappings and things like that, but they wouldn't have been able to read an Eli Mark's book with any verve. It wouldn't have sounded good. So I don't think you need to worry about it.
But I think it's going to get there.
Well, what's going to get there, Jim, is, and I think Audible has started it now, is you as a narrator can clone your voice, and on projects that you want to use your voice but you don't want to record it, they'll use that clone and they'll split the profits with you.
I'm not sure how I feel about that. I have to think about that.
Well, and just to remind everybody, this is 2024, and maybe when you're listening to this in the future, you'll go, "Oh, I thought everything was AI now. I thought I was AI." It's just the genie's out of the bottle.
I guess.
But I'm not worried about you as a narrator.
Okay, thank you. I'll worry about me as a narrator, and,
Yes.
and you worry about the rest of the podcast. As Luke Skywalker said, you worry about those fighters, I'll worry about the tower.
You worry about those fighters, I'll worry about the tower.
It's crazy. It's just so crazy. I saw an interview with Harrison Ford talking about the de-aging process for the latest Indiana Jones film.
Which was pretty good.
It was really good. And what he said was, it's different than it used to be. The movie makers have millions and millions and millions of images of me. And so that is an actual, it's not adjusted. They simply tell the computer, here's what we need you to do. And the computer takes pictures of me from different movies and adjusts. So it's perfect. And it is. I went back then and watched the scene, and it is perfect. And you go, holy crap, this is nuts.
Yeah.
How long before Humphrey Bogart is doing another movie?
Speaking of things that we love, not sure we love AI podcasting, but we do have things we like to recommend. I'm going to let you go first because this is episode 421, making it an odd one. So you go first.
Okay. Odd means me, I guess. Yes, I have a lot of them for this episode, and I'm trying to judge which one to use. Okay. I think I've made my decision.
All right.
Because we started this podcast talking about old guys discussing their ailments. One of my favorite actors is Jeff Bridges.
Mm-hmm.
I've loved him since I first saw him. I think his performance in a movie called Starman is unbelievably good.
Shall I tell you what I find beautiful about you? You are at your very best when things are worst.
It's just such a great film. That's not my I love that. I stumbled across an FX series called The Old Man that Jeff Bridges is starring in. And I thought, well, whatever he's in, I'm going to watch because he's worth it. And it's great. It's just great.
Hello?
Hey, kid, it's me. They found me.
Doug, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. The dogs are fine. Thought I covered the tracks. You and I were not going to be able to talk again. Remember that I love you. That I'll always love you.
There are so many twists and turns, and I'm about, I guess, 5 episodes into season 1. There's a season 2 on the horizon. John Lithgow is in it. Joel Grey made an appearance in it. It's so good. It's so much fun, and you don't know quite who is the good guy and who is the bad guy, and they even discuss that in the series. So I love that. If you are a Jeff Bridges fan, or if you're just a fan of good kind of spy TV, this is a great series. The Old Man, Jeff Bridges. So I'm really enjoying that. That's my I love that for this episode.
Well, mine is also kind of a bit of television, sort of. It's a link that I'll put in the show notes. You know, both you and I have done a lot of corporate events, a lot of corporate stage events where you get into a ballroom on a Thursday and they set everything up. And if you're lucky, there's a rehearsal Thursday night or maybe Friday morning, and then you do the show. And the show is essentially a dress rehearsal. I mean, there's just not enough time to make it happen. And the crews who are really good that we've run into over the years, you always want them backstage with you because they're going to save you. They're looking 3-4 moves ahead. I remember being on a show once where there was a laptop computer on a high top table next to the presenter's notes, and the presenter set his cup of coffee on the table next to the laptop, and the buzz in the headset was, okay, guys, where's the backup? Are we ready to go if he spills that coffee? Nothing had happened. Nothing had happened. Nothing did happen. But they were on top of it and ready to go in case something did. And there's a clip that you can see on YouTube of the crew on Saturday Night Live. I'm glad they recorded it. I think it was a Christmas episode. And what they did was they, during the opening credits, they just kept the cameras rolling while the credits are playing. And they piped in the sound on this video of the director and the assistant director. And over the course of those 90 seconds, when you can hear the band playing the music and you can hear the cast being announced, a crew had to come onto the main stage, which is home base, which is where the monologue is going to be, but it was also the location for the cold open. It was I believe the Oval Office, and they do live from New York at Saturday night, and then they roll into the credits. Well, we didn't see the credits. We saw what was happening in the studio. Studio 8H, I believe, is where they shoot that. Not a big studio. And it was a 3-wall set, and this crew had 90 seconds to tear down the set, get all the props, the desk, everything off the stage, and then reset it with flowers for the host to walk out and step onto the stage.
No, we never.
Stand by to zoom, stand by 31. And zoom. And roll 31. Take it.
Go, guys, on the move.
Good job, John.
It's Saturday Night Live. Hit 35.
No margin for error.
No. In fact, I think at one point the director says something like, that'll have to do. Keep going. That'll have to do.
Wow.
And they are phenomenal. That people have talked about the SNL crew over the years of just about how good they are. And this little video, there'll be linked in the show notes. It's about 90 seconds long. It just is phenomenal to watch these people make that happen on live TV. And you think, boy, they do this every week with a different problem every week. So That's I love that.
Well, I can't wait to see that. I cannot wait. I'm a huge Saturday Night Live fan and always have been. And at some point in this podcast, you should ask me about my Saturday Night Live story, because I've got one.
Maybe next time.
Yeah, not now.
I'll make a note for our next episode.
Way deep here. I think it's time we get down to business, really. If I'm tracking this correctly, last time I read chapter 20. So before I launch into chapter 21, just give us a recap of chapter 20, will you?
Sure. This is all the suspects are gathered in one place for the reveal of who the killer is. In that chapter, all the suspects arrived. Quentin gave his explanation. of how he thought they got the gun into the projection booth after the fact. The monkey did not cooperate, because sometimes monkeys don't. And then Eli's going to give his explanation, and he says, let's watch London After Midnight, and the lights go out and the screen lights up. And then we're right into chapter 21.
Chapter 21. The audience was remarkably patient and sat through a full 30 seconds of flickering white light before I sensed they were once again getting restless. I climbed up onto the stage and stepped into the beam of light. In my view, this is what remains of London After Midnight, I said, gesturing to the blank illuminated space behind me. The film that was part of a sales exchange gone wrong was no more substantial than the light coming from that projector. Detective Wright had finally become adept at picking up his cues, and the projector light switched off just as the lights popped back on in the auditorium. He peered down at me from the small square hole in the center of the back wall and gave me a quick thumbs up and a wide smile. I nodded my approval at his timing and then continued. This investigation has focused on the various people who had the interest and resources to buy the movie if it existed, I said, scanning the small audience below me. But no real time was spent looking at people who knew it didn't exist and who also needed money. But I'm getting ahead of myself, I continued, carefully making my way off the stage and down the stairs. It's safe to say the killer knew about Tyler and his black market dealings. I stepped off the last step and turned toward Mrs. Tyler James and Gunner, both of whom turned away immediately. Just as in my act, I seemed to have a sixth sense to find audience members who really had no interest in being part of the show. Mrs. James, you were aware of your husband's side business. Can you tell us how it worked? How it worked? She repeated in a classic stalling action. Yes, if I had something to sell and wanted Tyler to handle the sale, how would I go about it? She rolled her eyes, sighed, and then spoke in a flat monotone which was designed to express her contempt at this process and, by extension, me. It was all done via email, she said, snapping her gum as she spoke. For all I knew, it was the same gum she had started chewing in my shop earlier in the week. If you wanted to buy something, you'd email Tyler and he'd track it down. If you had something to sell, same thing. He'd look around for a buyer. And either way, he took a cut? I asked. It wasn't a charity, if that's what you mean, she said. So it could be relatively anonymous, I added. Completely anonymous, she said. And how did the money change hands? She shrugged. Sometimes there'd be a wire transfer, sometimes an actual money drop. It varied. Basically, anyone with access to Tyler's email could take part as a buyer or a seller. Sure, she said, crossing her arms and settling back into her seat to physically demonstrate she'd said as much as she was going to. So, I said, turning my attention back to the full group, if someone needed money, they could use Tyler's system to entice a buyer to hand over a large sum of cash for a treasured item. Like $750,000, Randall Glendower said suddenly. I held up my hand. Actually, I think in this case, all they were counting on was the deposit, $75,000. The killer knew the movie didn't really exist, or didn't care, one way or the other, so they were only planning on taking the ruse as far as the deposit stage. I looked over to see Quentin had taken a seat next to Megan. He was giving me a puzzled expression as he tried to see where I was headed with this theory. Let's assume the killer got in touch with Tyler, told him the print of London After Midnight was available to the highest bidder, and let Tyler go do his thing. After some negotiations, he found a buyer in Clifford Thomas. I knew it! Randall Glendower nearly shouted as he started to get up, and then realized this probably wasn't the best place for an outburst of this type, and settled back into his seat. Yes, you were outbid, I said to Randall, and he somehow found a way to both nod and shake his head at the same time. Tyler may have had some help in jacking up the price by bringing in another, more competitive bidder, I said, turning to Sherry Lisbon. One of her attorneys turned to her and started to whisper something, but Lisbon pushed her away. "There's no way you can prove that," she snapped. I shrugged. "Nope, I can't. I also can't prove Tyler took sympathy on Clifford when he recognized the writer's passion for the movie and let him win the auction, even though others would have gone higher just for the fun of taking it away from him." I glanced back at Sherry Lisbon, but she was now staring straight ahead, clearly not interested in engaging further on this topic. Somehow or other, Clifford Thomas won the auction and presented Tyler with a 10% down payment on the purchase, which in this case was $75,000. In cash, no less. This observation came from Chip Kavanaugh, who had spent much of my presentation scrolling through messages on his phone. "Yes, in cash," I agreed. "That would indicate trust in the middleman," Chip continued, not taking his eyes off the phone, "which would indicate Cliff had done a lot of business with Tyler." He looked up and seemed surprised all eyes were on him. "I'm just saying." "Be that as it may," I said, trying to pull back the ownership of the presentation, "some sort of prearranged drop was made. Tyler left the money and picked up the film reels, but that's when things started to go wonky. Because when Tyler got the film reels back to the projection booth and opened the canisters, they were empty." "But he would have known they were empty as soon as he picked up the canisters," Randall said, almost whining. "Film reels are heavy." "Yes, which is why the killer had placed some free weights in the canisters." "Tyler had a weight bench and some weights up in the booth," I said. "The night we found his body, I noticed he had a complete set, along with 4 other weights that weren't the same color as the full set. I think those were taking the place of the film reels in the canisters." To prove my conjecture, I pointed up to the projection booth. Detective Wright was standing by the door. He held up a black 20-pound weight in one hand and then held up another light-colored weight in the other. Despite his serious expression, the demonstration had the distinct feel of a product reveal moment from a cheesy 70s game show. When he realized he'd been fooled, Tyler went to confront the seller. "All right, wait. I thought the process was anonymous." This, surprisingly, came from Quentin. Even he seemed a little unnerved he had suddenly spoken up, but then he pressed on. "I mean, isn't that the premise? That this was anonymous?" "I believe it was," I said, "but I also believe somehow Tyler figured out who had put this alleged lost film on the black market, and when he went to confront that person, he didn't have to go far." I scanned the room, and everyone followed my eyes, nervously waiting to see where my gaze would land. "It was a short walk," I continued, "just down the hall to the theater manager's office."
All right, walking down to the manager's office. You know, this chapter, I think, clips along very nicely, but it is, I believe, the solution explanation is 3 chapters long, and I was worried about that, thinking, wow, it's taking forever to explain this very simple crime. Then I happened to turn on one of my favorite movies, Murder on the Orient Express, the original one with Albert Finney.
Yeah.
That show runs 120 minutes, 2 hours. And yeah, and his explanation of the murder is nearly 30 minutes of that. So
Well,
I don't
okay,
feel
then.
so bad, but I do feel bad for Albert Finney, because if you watch that last 30 minutes of that movie, it is nonstop talking for him in character, and it's not like close up, cutaway, close up, cutaway. I mean, they're long, continuous takes. The lore behind that is that he was appearing on the West End at night in a play, and he would go home and go to sleep, and they'd come in and get him at about 2 a.m.
Oh, my
Put him
God.
on a stretcher so he could still sleep, drive him out to Shepperton or wherever they were shooting, and he would sleep while they did the makeup. so that he could get enough sleep. And then he would get up, get in his costume, and talk all day long in that scene. And then they'd drive him back and he'd have to do the show that night. That's
oh, my Lord, my Lord, my Lord.
yeah.
I wish that could happen to me. I would love to be carried out on a stretcher, sleep through makeup, and then work all day and work all night. That's a dream for an actor, although I can hardly imagine that that's good for you in the long run.
Well, my understanding was he turned down the sequel, Death on the Nile, because he didn't want to go on location, and he didn't want to do the makeup again.
Yeah.
And as we learned when we talked to our friend Jeff Hatcher, when they were trying to cast Mr. Holmes, and he talked to Ray Fiennes, and Ray Fiennes said, I don't want to do the makeup. And Jeff Hatcher said, but you did worse makeup in Harry Potter. And he said, yeah, that's why I don't want to do it. I don't like it. So good for them.
Did I ever tell you my Ray Fiennes story?
Do you want to do that now, or?
Nah, we'll just, we're going to bank a couple of stories. Somewhere out there is a decent Saturday Night Live story from my youth. And then there is I encountered Ray Fiennes story when I was in England. So,
okay, we got that to look forward to.
Yeah, something down the road. It's a tease. That's what they call that in the business. We may never get back to it. You may have to email me directly for those stories. I don't think we're going to remember.
We could make a different level of listener that you pay extra.
Yeah. Ken, for instance, in New Jersey, he's that listener. Ken, email me directly and we'll get on the phone. I'll tell you those two stories. They're good stories.
I'm sure they are. Okay, this has been a very, very full episode. I think we've taken up enough of these good people's time. So next time, there'll be episode 422, which is chapter 22 of The Miser's Dream. And then some interesting thoughts from a friend of the show, Julie Eng.
We're going to revisit Julie's thoughts on what she learned about magic by selling magic in her father's magic shop. It's pretty fascinating.
It is cool. So that'll be next time in episode 422. Thank you for stopping by, everybody.
We really like you.
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Alberts Bridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at elimarksmysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.